Do you have a level 90 refinement rank 5 fish in your inventory and don't know what to do with it? Well, that's perfect because I think that Xinyan is a great character to use it. Now, this video is not going to specifically be about the fish. This is straight up just a full guide on Xinyan. Hey everyone, I'm Cyanide, your 4-star guy, and we can use a fish as a weapon now, so I want to talk about Xinyan. This video is going to be pretty in-depth and long, but it should have everything you need to know if you want to optimize her the way you want. The more I looked into her kit, the more nuanced I found her to be, so even though I was just stoked to make a video about a Chinese rockstar whacking dudes with a fish, I wound up doing kind of a lot of research, and hopefully it pays off. She is a power character, and one of her main appeals is that she has a shield that also buffs the active character's physical damage by 15% once you unlock her second passive. She can use this shield to be a useful support in physical superconduct teams, or be a main damage dealer using her own shield and buffs. Her ultimate includes a very strong single hit of physical damage at the moment it's cast, and even as a support who switches in and out, she can add a lot of damage to her rotation in. Even though she's pretty good as a support or damage dealer, she is also not overpowered at either role. She is just a pretty okay damage dealer because she doesn't have the best scaling on her normal attacks, and she has pretty good scaling on her charge attacks, but they are awkward to use on Claymore characters in the first place. As a support, she has a fairly mediocre buff, all things considered, but she is pretty interesting because she is also capable of providing a shield and doing a bunch of damage with her ult while she's at it. The problem is that she has to choose between having a better shield and doing damage with her ultimate, because her shield scales off of her defense, while her ultimate uses attack and the other damage stats. Her shield pops like a bubble without investment, and you want it to last for the buff, especially considering its pretty long cooldown. But using more defense than damage stats obviously means she has a weaker ultimate. There is no perfect way to build or use her, but if you find a compromise that you're happy with, I'm sure you'll enjoy using her. Alright, with that description out of the way, let's start off by talking about the kind of teams she can be useful in. With her physical damage buff and big physical hit on her ultimate, I think that she works best on teams that use superconduct to greatly decrease the enemy's resistance to physical damage. Especially since she doesn't offer much utility outside of physical teams, since she has a weak shield, no buff outside of physical damage, and a slow and unreliable pyro damage over time to cause reactions. She can deal pyro damage over a pretty long time if you use her skill to hit at least 2 enemies, in which case her shield pulses out flames periodically. But because you have to hit 2 enemies in a very close proximity when using her skill, and keep her shield alive for it, I choose not to rely on her for helping to spam pyro reactions. I think using Overloaded can add a nice splash of damage when using her though. Electro is an element we already need for Superconduct, and there are many Electro characters who can reliably set up for it when Xinyan uses her skill or ultimate. But blasting the enemies away with this reaction too much can make some fights irritating when you want to keep hitting them, especially if you want to use your charge attack that moves slowly. Other than that, I don't think that she'll be a good person to use amplification reactions like Melt or Vaporize because she doesn't deal that much pyro damage to use it in the first place, and I imagine would have a hard time if she were to try to reliably set it up too. Despite being neither of the elements required to do Superconduct, I think that she'll still be not that hard to fit onto a team because Superconduct teams tend to be very basic and aren't really demanding for reactions or have the need for specific skills or ultimate. Because of this, I even argue that having another pyro character for pyro resonance is worthwhile to give your team an attack boost. A team using Xinyan as the main damage dealer can look something like this. Rosaria, Diona, Kaya, or Chi-Chi can be pretty good cryo teammates to trigger Superconduct. Rosaria can give the team a small crit rate buff when using her ultimate due to one of her passives. Kaya is pretty much just as good in every other way, and I'd argue has a more convenient skill and ultimate, but doesn't give that crit rate buff that Rosaria does. Diona and Chi-Chi are useful if you want a healer, especially Diona since she can also give a shield and actually generate some energy for herself. As for the Electro teammate, I would recommend one who can deal Electro damage over time. Not only to trigger Overloaded when you want to, but to also hit enemies multiple times to clear enemies of any stray pyro status and to set up Superconduct. Beidou, Fischl, and Lisa can make good teammates here. Even though Lisa is typically the most awkward of this bunch to use, since her skill takes so long to use and makes her vulnerable, and if you don't use it, you won't get energy to have your ultimate up, she can use Xinyan's shield to protect her somewhat while she's charging her skill. Her ultimate also decreases the enemy's defense by 15%, and as a catalyst user, she can hold the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers to buff your attack when switching from her. Although I would totally understand if you want to use the Favonius Codex instead, if you really want her ultimate to be recharged more reliably. Fischl is very convenient if you don't want to struggle charging an ultimate to do her electro damage over time. Fischl and Lisa kind of have a weird time with Overloaded though, since Lisa's ultimate and Fischl's skills stays in place, but smaller enemies might be flown out of their turret's reach. Beidou doesn't have this problem though, since her ultimate stays around your character, so you can chase enemies as they are flown away from you. You can also use Kujosara if you can find a way to reliably set up Superconduct and pass on her attack buff to Xinyan. It is possible that you can use Raiden Shogun on this team, but she doesn't work well with physical damage, and her electro damage over time from off-field is weaker than other characters. Her ultimate makes her do all electro damage herself, and since the rest of the team doesn't support her electro damage, her ultimate will be pretty weak and take a lot of time from the other damage dealers since she has to be on the field to make any use of it. For the last teammate, Bennett seems like the best to complete the power resonance, give us his huge attack buff, generate power energy when we need, and can also heal whoever. Despite having her already having a shield and Bennett's buffs are amazing and everything, I still think Zhongli will be a good teammate for her. Zhongli has the most unbreakable shield known to the game, and it could be very nice to protect you as you just spin out doing your charge attack. Especially because I think the spinny charge attack is not good when you have to dodge something, cancelling the last strong hit before it happens and taking a second starting it up again afterwards. I'm basically saying that a shield like Zhongli's is nice to not let yourself get interrupted while swinging around. The shield also decreases the enemy's resistance to all damage near it. I really couldn't think of any other power character that would be useful to support her. Although the next character coming out, Toma, is also gonna have a shield, so I think he could also be useful, but I don't see him being as strong as the other two options. Now, if Xinyan wants to be a support for another physical damage dealer, the team structure will be very similar, so I won't need to explain much of each character. For example, a physical electro damage dealer, like Razor, Keqing, Fischl, or Beidou, can use the same cryo characters as before, as well as Xinyan and Bennett. Instead of Bennett, you could also slap on a second electro character. The second electro character can help generate more electro energy and use the particles that the damage dealer generates for themselves. But I would say using a second electro character here is only a little useful. If you want to use a physical cryo damage dealer like Eula, Rosaria, or Kaya, the story will be much the same. An electro support, Xinyan and Bennett, or a second cryo character like Diona or something. A second cryo character can help the other cryo character generate energy and also activate cryo resonance, which gives you 15% extra crit rate against cryo affected enemies. This could be pretty nice if you have a plan to keep them affected by cryo most of the time. Besides a cryo or electro physical damage dealer, the only other character I like using Xinyan with is Xiangling. With Xiangling's fast normal attacks and the Crescent Pike adding an extra hit for each attack, she can deal a lot of physical damage herself. Using them together is also an easy power resonance, and Xiangling can also spam Overloaded when she wants to. All we need is just a cryo and electro support to make this team a powerhouse. Although don't forget that you can still use Bennett instead of Xinyan for Xiangling. Alright, that's all I have to say about team compositions with Xinyan. And I'm about to go a little out of order, but I think that I should talk about her constellations first, since I think that some of her constellations change her playstyle and how you build her, and I honestly think that all of them are great. Her first constellation increases her normal and charge attack speed by 12% when landing a crit hit. I honestly barely notice the difference, but when I pay attention close enough to see it, it is nice. Her second constellation makes her physical swing on her ultimate a guaranteed critical hit. This is pretty amazing. You can just load up on crit damage and not worry about investing in crit rate to make her strongest attack deal loads of damage. This is especially true when she's a support, where besides her ultimate, she is not doing much more damage. So when she switches in with a ton of crit damage to use her ult, you better believe it will do some damage. But it is a little strange when we use her as our main damage dealer, because we are also using different attacks that aren't guaranteeing crits. But her ultimate is still a very strong source of damage. In this case, I think that if you had, for example, 120% crit damage, you would probably want around 40% crit rate. So I guess that you would want a 1 to 3 ratio for crit rate versus crit damage, instead of the standard 1 to 2 ratio that works best for most other characters. This constellation also generates her skill's shield when using her ultimate, without putting your skill on cooldown. It is useful to try to keep her shields up, but don't be fooled. Her shields still get broken very easily, so I still find myself waiting for her skill to get off cooldown. This is, in my opinion, her best and most important constellation. Her third constellation upgrades her skill, which is nice to make her shield just that little more durable. Her 4th Constellation decreases the enemy's physical resistance by 15% when they are hit by the start of her skill. This makes her supportive capabilities more notable on physical teams, but I can't really imagine hitting every enemy with the start of your skill all of the time. Her 5th Constellation levels up her ultimate, and that is also nice for extra damage. Her last Constellation decreases her charge attack stamina consumption and also increases the attack on them using half of her defense. Up until now, her charge attacks has always done a little more damage than her normal attacks, but because Claymore charge attacks are strange to use, especially because of the long startup, I would say that before C6, it wouldn't matter much whether you used her normal or charge attack. C1 does make her charge attack a little better because of the quicker startup, and it fits in an extra hit before it finishes. At C6 though, her charge attack is definitely better when you find good opportunities to use it. The worst thing about charge attacks with claymores is that it takes a long time to start up, and it is not beneficial to dash out of it to dodge or approach enemies. But if you choose to use a shield for her, she wouldn't get hit that much while using her charge attacks. It is true though that her own shield can't tank the most hits, and it is still weird to chase enemies if they walk away from you or get launched away from you, especially from overloaded. Alright, now let's talk about how we want to build her as a damage dealer. For her artifact's main stats, it is going to be fairly standard. You are going to want attack percent for your timepiece, physical damage for the goblet, and crit damage or crit rate for the circlet. If you don't have a good physical damage goblet, you can use an attack percent one, but it's not going to be quite as strong, but it might be the best thing you can get your hands on for now. For her subsets, you're going to want crit damage, crit rate, attack percent, defense percent, and energy recharge. That is roughly the order I would want it in, but it is up to you how much defense and energy recharge you want. Also remember that at C2, where her ultimate always crits, you want to balance your crit rate to crit damage closer to a 1:3 ratio. For the artifact sets, you would probably want a 2-piece mix of the 2 artifact sets that boost your physical damage, the Bloodstain and Pale Flame sets. This way you can get an entire 50% physical damage bonus for your charge or normal attacks and your ultimate. Of course, the full 4-piece sets of both of them can actually be stronger. For example, the Pale Flame set gives you up to 50% physical damage and 18% attack, but it requires enemies to be hit by 2 hits of her skill at least every 7 seconds to keep the buff up. Otherwise, it only has 25% physical damage bonus without any buff stacks. This is possible with your skill, but it requires 2 enemies to be near and your shield not to get popped too quickly. If you trust that you can get the buffs consistently, it could be a very strong set to use. The 4-piece Bloodstain set can also be very strong. In addition to giving you 25% physical damage, you can also get 50% charge attack damage at no stamina cost if you defeat an enemy. This set can be pretty awesome if you have enough fodder to keep the buff going, and you could probably just one-shot something with your ultimate to start it straight away. A 2-piece mix of sets that give you 18% attack like the Gladiator or Shimenawa's Reminiscence with a 25% physical damage set like the 2 sets I already talked about can also be pretty good, and you don't have to worry about gaining certain buffs. The Retracing Bolide set is also pretty attractive, giving you a bunch of shield strength as well as buffing your normal and charge attacks damage by 40%. The only thing is that it doesn't help your ultimate's damage like physical damage buffs do. That really is the only thing. Otherwise, it probably would have been my favorite set to put on her as a DPS. The Gladiator set is okay, but it doesn't help your charge attack or your ultimate's damage. If you are still early in the game, the Berserker set is fine as always, and the Resolution of Sharjarner set is pretty fun for her in theory, but it is definitely not as strong as 5-star artifacts. Now, weapons! The Song of Broken Pines is just amazing for a physical damage dealer like her, having a monstrous base attack and a nice physical damage subset, as well as an effect that gives us more attack as we hit opponents with our normal or charge attacks, and even buffs our attack speed when we reach 4 buff stacks. The Unforged is slightly better than the Wolf's Gravestone in my opinion. They both have the same base attack and attack percent subset, but their effects are different. At Refinement 1, the Wolf's Gravestone straight up gives you 20% attack and gives you 40% attack when you hit opponents at 30% HP, which is great, but the buff only lasts for 12 seconds and has a cooldown of 30 seconds. At Refinement 1, the Unforged gives you 4% attack whenever you hit an enemy for up to 5 stacks, making a 20% boost. It also gives you 20% shield strength, and the attack percent buff can also double when you have a shield active. I think that the Unforged maximum buff is easier and more reliable to set up than the Wolf's Gravestone, although it is slightly weaker, and I also appreciate the shield strength that the Unforged gives. The Skyward Spine is also pretty good and better than the 4 stars, with a large base attack, a small overall damage buff, an energy recharge subset, as well as extra hits of physical damage caused by its effect. The Serpent Spine is a very strong 4-star option, giving you a damage buff the longer you stay on the field without getting damage, which will hopefully be easier to keep up with your shield, as well as having a useful crit rate substat. The Lithic Blade can also be very strong if your team utilizes a lot of leeway characters, including Xinyan herself, since you gain more attack and crit rate with each leeway team member you have. The Blackcliff Slasher doesn't have a reliable effect, where you have to defeat an opponent to gain an attack buff, but its crit damage subset still makes it a solid choice. The Snowtome Star Silver is also a good option, having a big base attack for 4 stars as well as physical damage bonus as its substat. Its effect makes a small extra hit of damage once every 10 seconds with your normal or charge attacks. The extra hit can deal a lot more damage if the enemy is affected by cryo, but I pretty much don't think that it will happen unless you have a very specific rotation using your team. The Prototype Archaic is pretty decent. It has a high base attack and an attack percent substat, and also deals an extra hit of damage. I would only recommend this if you can't get your hands on a more solid 4-star option. If you don't have a good 4-star weapon yet, don't worry, the Skyrider Greatsword is actually a pretty good weapon for Xinyan and is actually a 3-star. It has an average base attack for 3 stars but has a great physical damage subset, and just like the Unforged, you get an attack percent buff for each hit you land on an enemy for up to 4 stacks. At C6 you could also use the White Blind. This 4-star weapon has a defense percent subset and also gives you more defense and attack percent for every normal or charge attack hit you land for up to 4 stacks. I only say that this is good at C6 because your charge attacks gain an attack buffs based on your defense. You will deal slightly less damage than the rest of the weapons I recommended so far, but maybe you will find it nice to have more defense for your shields. So even though I talked about how to build her as a damage dealer first, I do think that she works best as a quick switch character, who uses her skill and or ultimate to make that shield and deal some damage, since her normal attacks are just meh, and even though her charge attack is pretty strong, it can be very awkward to use as your main game plan. I just figured I would talk about her DPS build first because it is more straightforward and there is a lot more room for compromises you can make using her as a quick switch that would be easier to explain after already introducing most of the equipment options. If you don't worry as much about having the maximum damage for everything, which is fine if she is not your main damage dealer, you can round her out much more freely with defense for her shield and energy recharge. Her ultimate also being the only big source of damage for her switch-ins also makes her ultimate's damage go off the charts if you just pile on the crit damage and totally forget about crit rate once you get to C2. So for your artifact's main stats, attack percent, energy recharge, and defense percent for your timepiece can all be good for different reasons, and it's up to you which stat you'd really like more of. I would recommend physical damage for the goblet, but of course you could choose defense percent instead if you just want her shield to be strong. If you would rather do damage but don't have a good physical damage one, an attack percent goblet won't be that bad. For the circlet, crit damage would be awesome once you have C2. You could still use defense percent here or crit rate if you don't think that you'll get C2 anytime soon, and attack percent can be a decent backup option. For the subsets, you're going to want crit damage and attack percent for damage, and you can decide how much defense percent and energy recharge you would want. There are a few artifact sets that are strong for Xinyan in this quick switch playstyle. Pretty much all of them are to boost your damage since there is no artifact set to boost your shield's durability. You might have thought of the 2-piece retracing bolide set, which gives you 35% shield strength, but there is a common misconception, myself included before, that if a character has more shield strength, the shields they make are stronger. That is not exactly the case. It is the shield strength of the active character that reduces the amount of damage the shield they are using takes. So shield strength is actually most useful for characters who are going to be on the field the most to use the shield, rather than just whoever makes the shield. Anyway, the artifact set I would recommend most is the Emblem of Severed Fate set, whose 4-piece effect gives you a damage bonus on your ultimate based on 25% of your energy recharge, on top of giving you 20% energy recharge from the 2-piece effect. This makes energy recharge investments, like your timepiece, more worthwhile for damage and not just to make getting your ultimate up easier. Energy recharge investments aren't as strong in the damage category as straight up attack, but it's still pretty nice since it can help with both. Other than this set, you can use a few different 2-piece mixes, particularly involving one of the 25% physical damage 2-piece sets. You can even use both of them to make a 50% physical damage bonus, and it'd be the strongest possible set for damage. You could also use the 2-piece Noblesse Oblige set, which will give you 20% extra damage on your ultimate, which is only a little less effective than using the full physical getup, and the idea is pretty much the same. Using a 2-piece set that gives you 18% attack, like the Gladiator or Shimenawa set, can also be pretty serviceable. As for the weapons that would be strong for this playstyle, the Song of Broken Pines is still the best. Even though I wouldn't expect to get the buffs from its effect because you have to use normal or charge attacks to activate it, its insane base attack and nice physical damage bonus is still just real strong. The Wolf's Greystone is the next strongest damaging weapon because of its good base attack and attack percent subset, and free extra attack from its effect. I would say again that because she shouldn't be on the field as much doing damage, I wouldn't expect its effect to activate, but if you do manage to hit an opponent at low HP with her, you could buff the entire team with its effect, and it could even be the strongest and most useful weapon in this situation. The Skyward Pride is also still pretty strong, with its high base attack and extra damage from its effect, but it is also great for its energy recharge substat. The Unforged is the worst weapon in this situation, with the same stats as the Wolf's Greystone, but has an effect that doesn't help at all if you remember what I talked about shield strength earlier, and how she wouldn't be on the field long enough to get her buffs up. As for the 4 stars, I am very excited to announce that I found the Luxurious Z-Lord, the Rich Fish, the Dapper Slapper, to be one of the strongest when used this way. It has a low base attack, but it is balanced out by its big attack percent subset, and especially with its effect, which increases your ultimate's damage by a good amount and whips out an extra hit of physical damage when using it. This effect is especially strong because if you got it from the event, you should already have it at Refinement Rank 5, unless you were a lazy Genshin gamer. And it is synergistic with Xinyan since the extra hit is physical, so if you invested more in physical damage, the extra hit would have also been powered up. As a side note, I was pretty disappointed that we can't actually see a Titanic tuna flop up to whack the enemy. I feel like we're missing out, honestly. The Blackcliff Slasher, Snowtome Starsilver, the Lithic Blade, as well as the Prototype Archaic are in the same ballpark in terms of damage, and roughly in the order as I said them. Although the Lithic Blade can be a little higher depending on how many leeway teammates you have. The Serpent Spine can be pretty good, even without considering its crit rate subset, which is usually great but not really important at C2 and above. Its overall damage buff is still really strong if you are down to wait before an engagement to get its max stack. If you are looking for a 3-star to do damage, the Skyrider Greatsword is a pretty okay option. If you want to use 4-star options that give you energy recharge, I would recommend the Sacrificial Greatsword. It has a great base attack and it can give you a chance to use your skill multiple times. I like this because if you are using the Emblem of Severed Fate set for example, and you are already using an energy recharge timepiece, you would already have a good amount of energy recharge, and having too much more could be pretty redundant. So only adding a little more like the Sacrificial Greatsword does is good enough while keeping that high base attack. Also, the chance to get your shield again could be great because as I said many times already, her shield has durability problems, and I still think it will be useful if you have C2, and can get up to 3 uses of her shield, and using her skill again will also get her more pyro energy particles on top of that. The Favonius Greatsword has a lower base attack, but a very high energy recharge subset, and its effect gives you energy particles when you land a crit hit, probably using your ultimate at C2. I would also like to mention the White Blind and the White Iron Greatsword for their defense percent subsets to beef up your shield. The Katsuraki Kiri Nagamasa has an energy recharge subset, but I don't find any particular trait of it useful for Xinyan. Good, now I am about to briefly cover her talent prioritization, but I think it is going to be different for the specific playstyle you're planning to use her with. If you're planning to use her as a quick switch character, her ultimate and her skill are the only things you need to level up. It is up to you which one you value more. Leveling up her skill will add a lot of damage to her rotation in, and even though her shield is weak, I think that precisely because it is weak, you want to level it up to squeeze as much beefiness out of it as you can. If she is your main damage dealer, you are naturally going to want to level up her normal attack the most, and her ultimate would be second priority, but leveling up her skill will still be nice as always. Alright, it's finally over. This video was a lot longer than I was expecting, I'll be honest, but it would have felt wrong to give you anything less than the full picture. Hopefully this video gave you guys a better idea of what Xinyan is all about, and maybe even give you an idea that you might want to try out. if and how you want to use Xinyan is completely up to you in the end. Building her is all about compromise, so I wanted to lay out a lot of options, and I hope it wasn't too confusing. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed what I had to say, consider subscribing. I do Genshin Impact tips, team comps, character builds, and the occasional mess around video. Thank you for checking out my channel, and see you next time.